Welcome to another episode of The Inquisitive Analyst. Today, my guest has been a previous guest on the show. He's a product development catalyst, and his focus is specifically client delivery. In his 20 years of experience in fintech and the banking sector, he has worked directly in the trenches as a system administrator, a technical analyst, technical manager, a business management analyst, as well as a product analyst and senior manager. And today, his current role is Director of Innovation and Technology. With all of these years of experience, I believe he is certainly poised to chat about how to solve IT problems with very tight time constraints, or very tight constraints in general. So please help me welcome to today's show, joining us all the way from Toronto, Canada, Richard Audette. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, Marcus.
Hi. It's been a splendid time in Toronto with weather this summer. I was in New York City not too long ago, and it was stinking humid. So I hope it hasn't been too humid for you in Toronto.
We've definitely had some hot days, as we always do. I've been enjoying it. I've been out on my bike and gotten out. I like going down the lake on my paddleboard. It does get hot, but it's been pretty awesome.
Awesome, cool. Well, let's talk about tight time constraints and tight budget constraints and whatnot. What strategies would you say can be employed to help to prioritize features and functionalities for software when you have these tight budget constraints? Any advice?
I guess the first thing is you might not want to prioritize features and functionality. There's lots of things you might want to prioritize for. For example, maybe your product is more or less feature complete, right? And your focus is maintenance and currency. And so what's important is transparency. It's important to understand what the sponsor of the work is looking for. And it's important that the people who are doing the work understands. So what the sponsor is looking for has to be echoed down, and what the people doing the work, their work has to be visible to the sponsors. And so that if you're not prioritizing functionality, you might be switching to a less, maybe you're optimizing for cost, right? And you might want to switch from an expensive database to a less expensive database. There's lots of things you can optimize for. So the important thing is transparency, so that everyone is on the same ship. And the organizations I've worked with, the way we always seem to come to is sort of an every 2-week cadence. So where the management team meets with the sponsors or the executive team, and the executive team has the opportunity to present. Maybe it is features and functionalities. We're looking for this, and the management team can speak to what the team working on the product is doing, and that can be echoed up and then echoed down. And then 2 weeks gives it's enough time for a significant chunk of work to be done, but it's still sufficiently frequent that if something comes up, right, you can adjust priorities depending on what the current important thing is.
That's interesting. So is it something like you're prioritizing based on an agile type of methodology, in the sense that every 2 weeks you're looking at it and you're saying, oh, maybe we should switch this in this case, or maybe someone left and so we have one less resource. What do we do? Well, we have one new hire. What do we do? Oh, oops, that database is costing us more than we want. Let's switch it out to an inexpensive database. And so that every 2 weeks you can reprioritize that budget that way.
I think independent, it describes agile behavior, but independent of like the agile software development methodology, right? Even if you were maybe following even an older or a more traditional waterfall approach, even then, the 2-week cadence allows you to you'll typically have several projects, right? And you'll have resources working on. They might be split between 2 projects.
Yes.
And independent of the methodology you're following, you can reallocate resources.
Right.
right? So if a project is falling behind and one's ahead, right, you can shift a resource from one to the other, right? And so it is like by definition, right, you're changing, so it's agile behavior.
Right.
But I think independent of what methodology you follow, that 2-week cadence isn't well. It might not be 2 weeks in every organization, but it's transparency, and it's meeting at a prescribed cadence to adjust priorities and how resources are allocated and
So
what is being worked on.
it's practical and it's very doable, 2 weeks, and it's probably highly recommended. Great. Let's talk about best practices when we're trying to maintain high quality standards in IT product development. If you're facing these strict time constraints, what are some best practices for trying to maintain high quality standards?
Here again is focusing resources on what's important. You might have, like, for example, products are made up of various parts, right? And some parts will always be more important than others. So an example might be a mobile application might serve content to consumers, and right in that mobile application, you might have notifications, and you might have billing, right? And if a user misses a notification, the consequences probably aren't, maybe they'll miss a featured video, right?
Right.
But if the billing gets wrong, right, there's consequences, right? That like a terrible experience. So probably what you want to do is focus efforts on what's important, is identify what's critical and ensure that the attention you're paying in certain areas is allocated to their, like, focus on what's important.
Okay, superb. And that sometimes when you want to focus on what's important as an IT manager or even as a sponsor, that it's that person with authority that's going to make those choices on where to focus, I would suspect.
Yeah, but it's with the input. It's important that everyone, like, definitely the direction is set, but there's definitely there's influence, right? And there's opportunity for everyone to by relaying information, relaying opinions, right? That's how the best decisions are made, because a sponsor won't necessarily know, like, maybe you work with lots of different payment processors, or maybe you have a connection to an FI in one corner, right? And they're not going to know all the details, right? And so it's everyone has to participate, and somehow that information has to get shared so that good decisions can be made.
So communication is key for even when you're under tight budget and tight time constraints. All right, superb. Scope creep. This is something that a lot of us have experienced. So what are the most effective ways to try to manage that scope creep in IT projects if you have very tight constraints? It could be a tight budget or a tight time constraint. What's the best way to manage scope creep?
I think the most important thing here is, or one of the best tools I found is when something comes in, is to ask, like, let's pretend we're launching tomorrow and this feature isn't ready.
Okay.
Do we delay the launch? Right? And that's how you really come to understand what a requirement is, because right, when you come to launch day, right, there's that decision is there's stuff that may be incomplete, and there's stuff that you can fix afterwards, right? And every launch day, you just, like, decisions are made, like, can we accept this? And if you pull that question back, right, when those, because requirements, right, there's always things we want,
right,
and it just forces everyone to think, particularly people who make that decision to launch, right? Is you think it's like, you know what, like I think we could live without this.
Yeah.
And I had this just recently. I was working on an initiative, and again, right, we were working with a third party, and we were working towards a date had been agreed with a third party, and so there's a chunk of work to be done, and I had sort of guarantee that date, I had essentially done an MVP, right? Like something that would be feature complete, but might not be the best user experience. And it was something I put together knowing that the team could deliver it on the timeline. And I walked through it with a sponsor, and like sort of addressing is like, well, this will be missing, but it's not, the product will still work, right? And we can deliver that afterwards.
Right.
And the sponsor expressed, was concerned about user experience, and realized it was like, it's kind of, this is incomplete, right? Like it's like, this is not a great experience. And I was just sort of presenting, right, that we'd agreed to this timeline, and like it would mean pushing the date. I asked the question, I'm like, if we delivered what we're saying here with a less optimal experience on this date, would you say, would you push out the date? And he's like, yes, we would push it. I'm not going to deliver this experience. And which was important, right? Because I think we as the team had sort of understood, right? We had been in these meetings with this third party, and we'd agreed to this date, and we just assumed that hitting this date was critical. And what turned out, no, customer experience was more critical. And had we just assumed, right? And it's not that we couldn't hit the date, but as you're planning, right? It's you always have to anticipate for unknowns, right? And but yeah, it was just sort of interesting, right? You asked the question, and definitely we got the feedback, no, that the date is less important than a good customer experience in this case.
So customer experience overrides scope creep. Great.
Or it can. And in this particular case, it did.
It did.
And definitely, I've been in other situations where no, the date can't move.
Yeah. No, true.
Right. And we made the wrong assumption in this particular case, and we got the feedback.
Superb. And so certainly timelines can be flexible, and that's what's important when you're building a product out there. If you've got really tight constraints that aren't malleable, that aren't modifiable, then you might be stuck. Let's look at automation tools. There's tons of them out there, and even more so with the development of generative AI these days. So how can automation tools be utilized to help to optimize workflows, again, when you're under tight resource constraint environments or tight time constraints? So how can automation tools be utilized to optimize workflows?
So the one thing I've and it's hard to give advice. It's hard to know where everyone's. I've only worked at the organizations I've worked at, so it's hard to know where everyone is on automation. And what I would say is the one thing I've really noticed has made a huge difference in the last 10 years in the teams I've been with is automating deployments. Mm-hmm. So getting to the point where you have code, and clicking a button gets that code to the environment you want it in, and it's automated in a way that you can count on it. And I really feel that getting to that point, if I think of the times from before when I did that, like before these systems were put in place, a lot of time is packaging the software and putting it on the server, and configuration files being missing, and a lot of cycles from the dev teams I worked with were spent on getting the software working on a given environment. And definitely the time that I've seen invested in automating those processes, it just that's something I've seen like super payback. Just the team gets to focus on things that matter.
Wow.
I had another example that's escaping me. If you'll excuse me for a second, I'm just gonna.
No problem.
There was
I
definitely.
I was going to say, just out of curiosity, you might want to add, if it interests you, these automation tools. They have schedulers on them, do they, or is it just push a button and then it goes?
Oh, the way we've done it is push a button and then it goes. So the dev team writes the code, right, and then when they're satisfied with it on their laptops, they push it to a shared dev environment, sees that it works there. When QA is ready to test something, they'll like take that feature and then deploy it to their QA environment. And then when the business team is ready to test something, buttons pressed and it moves to their environment, and then all the way to production. And I guess that's the other thing is when the systems are set up well, once you see that it flows from one environment to the other, the other thing it gives you is confidence when you go to production.
Right.
And everything happens more frequently.
Right.
And yeah, you don't get. It might be common to some people. Maybe people have been doing this for decades, and not myself. But I've definitely been involved in deployments where, like, it's an 8-hour activity, and the last 4 hours is just trying to figure out why it's not working. And when you get automation to the point where it happens reliably, just the team, just efforts are focused on development rather than trying to figure out why it's not working.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting you talk about promoting something to production or to the development side or UAT. I worked not too long ago with a company that didn't have a test environment. They only had production. So we tested in production.
Yeah. And like, it's hard to, it's hard without knowing the whole situation, right? That there are times that things that seem crazy from the outside might make sense. I can't speak to that one situation. And there's different levels of, if you're working with banking systems, very different than working on a website.
Right. True.
Right? Like if you might have a corporate website that gets 10 hits a day versus, right? There's, but yeah, definitely, it's something I've found. The automating deployments has really helped the team.
Oh, superb. Sorry, if you wanted to look up your example, go ahead.
Yeah. So another example I was going to say is with automation is sometimes automation isn't the answer. Often when you're launching a new feature, you don't know how it's going to be used. You don't know how much it's going to be used. So sometimes, like, maybe people in a chair is the way to do it. Like if you're doing something 10 times a week and it's going to take you 3 months to write the code, and you don't know if the feature is going to have take up the market, right? Doing things manually might make sense, right? You have to weigh. So like automation might not be the answer when you're testing something. And the other thing is when you have people doing the work, you can change the process, and maybe that allows you to, maybe you'll try 10 different things, right? And you'll know how the process should work, and then you automate that.
Okay.
So definitely that there's things that I have the experience of launching, right? And initially,
right,
you have people doing it, right? And then eventually you, once you start seeing it's like, oh, we're spending a lot of time doing this, right? Then you step back, what's happening, and then work to automate it.
Great. This is a good piece of advice. Do it manually first a couple of times, and once you get the hang of it, then if you think this is something that can be automated, great. If it's something that needs constant manual intervention, then stick with that. So that's a good way of thinking about it. Let's look at technical debt. And for those who don't know what technical debt is, it's really the result of trying to prioritize a quick delivery over perfecting your code. At least that's what some people call technical debt. I think that's pretty much it. So how can technical debt be managed? How can it be minimized during IT development under tight constraints to try to ensure you've got this long-term stability? So how do you manage and how do you minimize technical debt in IT product delivery?
I guess the other thing with technical debt, right, is even if you wrote perfect code, you typically target. You always have dependencies, right? Maybe you're targeting a certain operating system. You're pulling in certain libraries, and what happens is the world moves. And even if you wrote this perfect system, you accumulate technical debt because maybe you're using Microsoft SQL Server, and Microsoft is an end of life, and you have to move to the next version. So one of the things is probably the first thing is be aware of what you're dependent on and track it. And if you can, try to continuously move forward. So little jumps are easier than big jumps. And if as you're releasing work, you gradually do little jumps and update dependencies, it's easier and far less work than waiting until something breaks and then you're put in a situation where you're scrambling. So I guess one is be aware of your dependencies and just try to do frequent little jumps rather than big jumps. The other thing is, as you mentioned, right, the technical debt in your own software. Things you caused yourself, like sometimes maybe to hit the delivery date, you made a decision that was not optimal for maintenance.
Right.
And I think here the thing is be opportunistic. And maybe, and when you do it, perhaps you have this debt, right? And the next time you do work in that space, re-examine it is probably the right time to do it. And I'll give an example. One of the applications I've worked on sends a lot of servicing email. So every time a servicing email is like every time you do a password reset, you get an email, or you change your profile, you get an email. So email that supports the service. And the application had an in-house templating system, and it was branded to work. The platform I was working on is branded. It was servicing banking customers, and every bank has different branding requirements. So we have all these templates, and then we'd add a client, and then let's say we had 10 templates, we had a client, now we have 20 templates. And then we had another client, we have 30 templates. And then every time that you have to change a disclaimer, you're not updating 10 templates anymore, you're updating 30 templates, and you're testing 30 templates. An email that displays properly in Gmail might not work in Yahoo Mail or whichever, right, or Outlook. And these templates were adding up, and we had a significant change come our way. And what could have done, maybe like, I don't know how many templates we had at that point, but let's say 100. Someone could have just manually updated 100 templates, right? And your executive team does not know this problem. They're not going to say, I want to sponsor an initiative that like redoes our email templates, right? They don't know this is a problem. But at this time, the team was very aware this is a problem. It's like, okay, we've got to update 100 of these. Like, we've got to rework this solution. And it was sort of a developer that was assigned the work. He could have just updated all the templates, but he thought he looked at the time he was going to spend. It's just like, no, this is just silly. So he looked around at a bunch of solutions, and the service that we were leveraging for delivering the email had their own templating engine, and it was far better than the one we had built. And it was like we were paying for it anyway because we were using the service to deliver our mail. So the developer took it upon themselves to like sort of genericize the template and like sort of make the logo a variable and make various variable things a variable. So rather than have 100 email templates, we had 10, and the branding was just sort of a an element, right? And likely the effort of doing this was probably comparable to just updating, testing 100 templates. So here we have this huge piece of technical debt that was causing us a ton of problems, and really I'll say it was fixed for free. Right? It was cycles that were going to be spent anyway, and we chose to spend them differently. So we were able to retire an internal templating engine. We benefited from that work. It's not like customizing templates has stopped, right? So every time we touch a template, that work that was done a couple of years ago has saved us. So yeah, just be opportunistic. Don't expect, particularly if you're the one working on these initiatives, right? No one up above is aware of these problems, and you have to bring them to light. And when you just every time you're doing something, look at what you're working on, and there's an opportunity to improve it. And often, right, you can be opportunistic, and you can sometimes in the course of regular everyday work address a lot of this technical debt.
No, I think that's great. And even as a business analyst, as a technical business analyst, as a developer, you're constantly asking questions. How can we make this more efficient? Let me look around. If it's a BA who doesn't have their hands deep into development, let me talk to the developers and see, how do they do this? Is there a faster way of doing it? And is it something that our sponsors should be aware of? I mean, you're constantly asking questions. Like you said, be opportunistic, and it starts with asking the right question. So superb. We were talking a bit earlier about titles, and I introduced you by saying you've got all these titles, and we were chatting about, does a title really make a difference? And just out of curiosity, maybe we can rehash that conversation a bit for the audience. Richard, of all the titles you've got, do you find that the work has changed over the years, or is it just the titles that have changed?
If anyone ever looks at my LinkedIn profile, I put as my, my byline is product delivery catalyst, and I guess I put that up there about probably 10 years ago now. And what I found, right, is I've sat on the business side of delivery teams, and I've sat on the technical side, and depending on what was needed at the time, as organizations changed, I'd be put on one side and I'd be put on the other. And I've had hands-on technical roles as well as business roles. And as I was thinking about what I brought to the team, a lot of it was just, I found I was bridging, right? So when we were working with shared infrastructure teams, and often as an application owner, I'd get inquiries from the security team saying I have to address something, right? And I had to communicate that to the infrastructure team. And I found myself Googling, when you have the little lock in your browser, how you set up a server to configure certain ciphers, which wasn't my job, right? But I had this issue from security, and I own this, and I had to talk to infrastructure. And yet I wasn't the one applying these things to the server, right? And it's what am I doing? And I'm connecting these disparate parts of my organization and other organizations, and I'm kind of like a catalyst, right? In a chemical reaction, right? In a chemical reaction, you have the chemicals that go into things, and sometimes you can accelerate a process by putting another thing in the reaction that doesn't change, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't change the reaction. It just accelerates it. I'm I like to think of myself as a catalyst. I like to bridge, and not just bridge internal teams, but bridge often, as I said, I like working with directly with clients as well, and working with their business teams and sometimes their infrastructure teams. So yeah, although my official title at the office has changed as I've been shifted from team to team and company to company. But yeah, I like to think of myself as a catalyst.
I think that superbly fits you well, and it fits a lot of BAs too. Like you said, we're just there to help speed things up, help get things done faster. And we are really BAs, business analysts or technical business analysts. We are catalysts of change. We are purveyors of change. That's what we do. We help to connect disparate things or disparate people or disparate ideas together. So I think it's a superb word. And with that said, Richard, it's always a pleasure to have a chat with you. You've got this magnificent mindset. Maybe it's your computer background, I don't know. But it's superb to listen to you. You've got excellent examples which try to simplify complex ideas. So thanks again for being on the show, Richard. It's excellent having you.
Thank you, Marcus. Be sure to pop by next time you're in town.
Definitely. And I was going to say, if anyone wants to get in touch with you out there, how can they do so?
LinkedIn is always great, and I keep a blog that I update like once every few months when I have a fresh idea.
Yes, I read your blog, and just out of curiosity, what's the link, the URL for that blog?
It's www.hotelexistence.ca.
Hotelexistence.ca. All right, check it out, audience. I've read some of Richard's blogs, and I think you should too. Excellent. Well, thanks again, Richard, and have yourself an amazing day in Toronto.
Thanks, Marcus.
All right, take care.